On the afternoon of August 2nd, 1100, King William Rufus was struck down by a stray hunting arrow in the New Forest. His younger brother, Henry, was in the hunting party and immediately capitalized on the suspicious death to seize the English throne. Henry was the youngest of 4 brothers. He possessed no inherited mandate to rule, and his initial inheritance had left him landless. Taking the crown was a hostile corporate takeover of the state. Immediately, he faced a severe operational hurdle. He had to secure a stolen kingdom against a volatile class of heavily armed Norman barons, men who held estates on both sides of the English Channel and inherently distrusted centralized authority. Henry's mitigation strategy was speed. He abandoned his dead brother's body in the forest and hastened to Westminster Abbey for a rushed coronation. He needed to establish legal ownership of the state before his older brother Robert could mount a counterclaim from Normandy. To buy shareholder loyalty, he immediately issued a coronation charter. He promised the barons he would correct the oppressive policies of the previous regime and restore traditional property customs. Acquiring the crown was an act of ruthless opportunism. Keeping it required a systemic redesign of how royal power was enforced. 6 years later, in 1106, Henry crossed the Channel to eliminate his primary dynastic liability, his older brother, Robert Curthose, the Duke of Normandy. The Battle of Tinchebray was a swift and completely unglamorous suppression, characterized by a mechanical, crushing wall of iron. Henry made a highly unorthodox tactical decision. He ordered most of his knights to dismount, forcing a brutal, highly disciplined infantry engagement rather than relying on a traditional, volatile cavalry charge. The outcome was absolute. Robert's forces were systematically routed in under a single hour. The dynastic rival was permanently neutralized. Robert was captured and subjected to lifelong confinement in various castles, removing him from the geopolitical board until his death 28 years later. Tinchebray taught Henry a critical lesson in governance. Relying on traditional martial lords and open battlefield victories was far too dangerous and unpredictable a method for maintaining a stable regime. True permanent power required a strict monopoly on violence and wealth, and Henry would achieve this not by appeasing warlords, but by deploying a bureaucracy of accountants. Henry installed a new governing class composed of educated, low-born clerics referred to as new men. Because they lacked high social status, their authority derived entirely from the king's favor, allowing Henry to bypass the traditional landed nobility. The core mechanism of this new administrative state was the Exchequer. It was an executive body that sat twice a year at Easter and Michaelmas to aggressively audit the accounts and revenues collected by royal officials. This system solved a massive computation problem. Local county sheriffs were very often illiterate, and tracking county farm revenues across a fragmented kingdom was prone to severe fraud and delay. The county farm was the regular, fixed income derived directly from local lands held by the king. The physical interface designed to eliminate this fraud was a 10 by 5-foot table featuring a raised lip around its outer edge. Covered in a black cloth bearing stripes, it utilized the grid logic of an échiquier, or chessboard, with specific columns representing pounds, shillings, and pence. This layout functioned as a giant physical abacus. It calculated complex sums in real time, right before the eyes of the court. The audit process was pure psychological theater. The chief justiciar and the barons of the Exchequer sat shoulder to shoulder on one side of the table, facing the sweating, accountable sheriff on the other. Because the math was visual, it stripped illiterate sheriffs of the ability to feign ignorance or claim a misunderstanding. The exact, undeniable debt was calculated in plain sight. Henry's new men weaponized this mathematics, holding sheriffs absolutely accountable for every single silver penny owed to the crown. The Exchequer table mechanized tax collection, replacing negotiated feudal tributes with cold, inescapable mathematical certainty. Once the math was settled in the upper Exchequer, the physical wealth had to be deposited, secured, and logged in the lower Exchequer, also known as the receipt. This presented a technical challenge. The state needed to issue a secure, unforgeable receipt in an era long before advanced cryptography or widespread literacy. Their technological solution was the wooden tally stick. To encode a deposit, clerks cut specific widths of notches into the wood. The size of the cut represented different denominations of wealth, a deep cut for £1, a smaller notch for a shilling. The security of the transaction was physical. Once the notches and written details were applied, the stick was split cleanly down the middle. The stock went to the depositing sheriff as proof of payment, and the foil remained in the Exchequer's treasury. Because of the unique grain of the wood, a stock could only ever perfectly interlock with its exact matching foil. Any attempt by a sheriff to carve extra notches into his stock to fake a deposit would be instantly exposed during the Michaelmas audit when the two halves failed to match. This piece of split wood functioned as an impenetrable medieval blockchain. It eliminated financial fraud and cemented the absolute integrity of the state's ledger. Physical receipts were only half the system. To achieve total centralization, Henry required a permanent database of state leverage to track long-term, rolling debts. The ultimate output of this calculating machine was a collection of financial records known as the pipe rolls. They earned their name from their physical construction. 2 strips of parchment were stitched end to end and rolled into tight pipe-like cylinders, designed for dense, secure storage in the treasury. These records served as a strict ledger of audited accounts, tracking farms, judicial fines, and scutage. Scutage was a financial levy paid by knights to the crown in lieu of providing physical military service. The pipe rolls functioned as an inescapable institutional memory. If a debt was not paid in full, the exact balance automatically rolled over to the next year's record, permanently binding the debtor to the state. The scale of this extraction was staggering. The sole surviving pipe roll from Henry's reign, dated 1130, recorded an immense £68,850 owed to the king, a sum that dwarfed the resources of any individual baron. Through the table, the tally, and the roll, Henry successfully converted biological, feudal relationships into a persistent record of state leverage. By 1120, the English corporation was operating flawlessly. Henry's machine was extracting wealth at a scale unseen in the Norman era, neutralizing internal threats, and maintaining completely secure borders. He maintained a grand, opulent, itinerant court, complete with exotic private menageries at Woodstock, financed entirely by the quiet, hyper-efficient hum of the Exchequer. Henry had achieved what no previous Norman king had managed: systemic control over his barons through continuous financial audit, rather than risking open warfare. But hidden within this otherwise perfect system was a terminal structural vulnerability. Henry had only one legitimate male heir, William Adelin. The king had engineered a flawless, data-driven administrative machine, yet the entire corporate structure remained terrifyingly dependent on a single thread of biological succession. On the evening of November 25, 1120, at the port of Barfleur in Normandy, a routine logistical shift back to England was underway. The state chartered the White Ship, a newly refitted, fast vessel, to transport the corporate heir, William Adelin, alongside 300 members of the elite governing class. Before setting sail in the dark, the crew and passengers engaged in excessive celebratory drinking. Revelers ordered the captain to speed through the night. The fast-moving ship drifted off course and struck the submerged Kilweth Rock in pitch darkness. The vessel rapidly capsized. Approximately 300 elites drowned in the freezing water, instantly wiping out the state's sole legitimate male heir. When Henry was finally informed of the disaster, he collapsed with grief. His meticulously planned succession had been annihilated by a single nautical accident. Henry made frantic attempts to repair the biological chain of command, rushing into a fast second marriage to Adeliza of Louvain, but the union remained childless. The final systemic failure arrived upon Henry's death in 1135. The barons flatly refused to accept his daughter Matilda as queen, actively rejecting the king's dictated succession plan. The highly centralized state immediately fractured into a devastating 18-year civil war known as the Anarchy. The Exchequer could track every silver penny and neutralize every warlord, but the White Ship disaster proved that no bureaucratic machine can survive the failure of its biological core.